What's up guys, Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com. So in today's video we're going to talk about everything you need to know to work with materials in SketchUp in 2023. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. Alright, so I've done a video like this before on sandbox tools and everyone seemed to like it, so let's do the same thing with materials. So we're going to go start to finish talking about everything you need to know to add materials in SketchUp. So first off, materials are fairly simple. So the way the materials work is you have a face inside of your 3D space like this one, and you can apply either colors or textures to this surface. The way that you're going to do that is by using the paint bucket tool, which you can activate by tapping the B key on your keyboard. Notice how when you tap the B key on your keyboard, you're going to get a materials window that shows up over here on the right hand side of your page right here. This is going to allow you to select different materials and apply them to an object. Note that this is going to look a little bit different on a Mac. I'm not really able to make a tutorial about materials on a Mac because I don't have a Mac. But let's start by just adding a color. So if you go inside of this materials pane right here and you look, there's different categories of materials over here on the right hand side. And so some of them are going to contain things that are textures, which we'll talk about in a minute. There's also some preset colors like these. So you can take these colors and you can click on them. Notice how when you click on them, they're going to show up as highlighted over here on the right hand side, and you can click on an object in SketchUp in order to apply a material to that surface. Now note that every object in SketchUp or every surface in SketchUp has a front face and a back face. Well, we've only applied this material to the front face, and notice that you can see that over here in the face section in your entity info. You could also apply this material to the back face if you wanted to. Now, let's say you wanted to get rid of a material. What you can do is you can select default right here, and you can use that in order to paint an object back to the default material like this. You can also click on the little box with the plus button right here. That's going to allow you to create your own material. So I could call this like custom blue or something like that. And notice how you can use either RGB or the color wheel in order to select that material. So let's say I wanted this blue right here. I could select that, click on OK, and I could create that material. Now, if I click in here, I can paint with the material that I created. Now, if I wanted to, I could select this material in my list right here and click on Edit and go in here and change it. So, for example, I could come in here and I could change the blue in the color wheel. Well, notice how when I do that, it's also going to change on my page right here. If you're looking for a material that you've created, you can go into Select and you can look for in model. That's going to show you a list of all of the materials that are currently living inside of your model right here. So notice how I can find that just by mousing over it. I can see the name of that material and I can apply it. Now, real quick, before we jump into textures, I just want to note that if you have a 3D shape like this one, I can apply materials to any of the individual faces like this. I could also select multiple faces and then activate this tool and click, and it's going to apply materials to all of those. One other thing to be aware of is it is also possible if you have an object that's grouped. So if I select it and make it a group, and then you apply a material, notice how this is just going to apply a material to everything in the group right here. Now, note that it is possible. If I double click into this object and select a material, I can apply different materials to these faces like this. Now, if I change the material on the cube, notice how anything that has a material applied directly to the face. So if I double click in here and click on these faces, notice how this is going to show me that I have a red material applied to this face. But if I click on the box, it's going to show me that the group has a gray material. So if you ever have materials that aren't showing up the way that they should, it's likely because you've applied something to the outside of a group and something to a face like this. And then if I wanted to reset all of this, I could just apply a default material. I could also do a Control A and apply a default material like this. Now, we've talked a little bit about colors. Now let's talk about how we can add textures. And so what a texture is it's basically a material that's made up of an image that tiles. So let's say that we select a surface like this one, and I'm going to go down here and I'm going to pick one of these materials. So in this case, maybe this, we'll go with this tumbled brick. So if I apply that to this surface, notice while these materials over here were just colors, this is actually an image, right? It's a repeating image of a brick wall right here. And so what's going to happen is this is going to repeat this over and over and over again on your surface. Now, we can adjust things in our material by going over to the Edit tab with that material selected. And note that, by the way, if you want to select a material inside of SketchUp, you can come over here and click on the Sample Paint button, and that's going to allow me to click on a material, and it's going to let me select whatever I click on. So I can select this really easily to edit. So now, what I want to do is I want to go into the Edit tab right here. And when I go in the Edit tab, note that there's a few different options that we have in here. The one that I probably use the most is the one down here, which allows me to adjust the size of the material. So if I want to make this material smaller, what I can do is I can type in 1 foot like this, and notice how my material changes sizes. And so notice how when I did this, right, this material changes, but then this one does as well. So let's say I was to put in like 6 feet right here. Notice how my height changes along with my width. That's because these are linked together using this lock-unlock aspect ratio. Now these get locked because usually what'll happen is if you make an adjustment to one, you want the other one to change so you don't get image distortion in here. So let's say, for example, that I was to change just this bottom material to something like 10 feet. Well, notice what that's going to do is that's going to take this image and it's going to stretch it out, which we don't necessarily want. We usually want our images to maintain their proportions. So we usually keep this button locked so that those proportions are locked. Now, if you ever need to reset, you could just click on this button right here, and this is going to automatically relock. So you can use this in order to make sure your proportions stay the same. Now, let's say that we wanted to take this material and change the color a little bit. And we're just going to do a little bit. We're not going to do a lot. What you don't want to do is you don't want to come in here and just drag on the color wheel like this, because notice how you get this like crazy colorization in here, right? And then your bricks don't look very good. So first off, if you ever accidentally make that change, you can just come over here and you can click on the reset color to take it back to what it originally was. But say that we did want to change this color to more of a reddish brick. There's this option over here for colorize. Notice how what it says, if I mouse over it, is force all texture colors to be the same hue. That's going to keep it from doing that crazy colorization that we saw before. So if I check the colorize box right here, and then I drag this, notice how it's got that hue kind of locked in here, and you can use this in order to kind of change the color of your material. Now, I will say you want to be kind of careful with this because over colorization just doesn't usually look very good. I mean, you might get away with it with like an orange or a red or something like that with a brick, but usually you want to keep it kind of close to the middle in here and just adjust this a little bit. Now, if you did want to try to match a specific color, you can come in here to your RGB and you can type in values. So let's say I wanted like a 150, 150, 200, like this. I can come in here and adjust the RGB value over here. You also have options in here to match the color of an object or a color on the screen. So let's say I wanted this brick to match this blue. I could click on the match color on screen, click right here, and this is going to match that blue color. And again, if you ever get stuck on this, you can just click on the button to reset color right here. So now let's talk just a little bit about making your objects sit properly on faces. So let's go ahead and let's add another material in here. So I'm going to create a standing up wall, and let's say that we wanted to add, this embossed texture on here like this. Now, with an embossed texture like this one, you want to make sure that you're not cutting these objects off in the middle, right? So what that means is you have to adjust the sizing of this material. Now you could come in here and try to adjust this by changing the size of the object, but that doesn't necessarily help us because notice how this is still getting cut off. But there's another set of tools in SketchUp for placing textures on surfaces. And so let's say, for example, that I was to right click on this, and note that you need to be right clicking on a raw face in order for this to work. So like if this was grouped, for example, if I make this a group and then right click, there's no texture option. But with the raw face, if I right click on it, there's an option here for position texture. So what position texture is going to allow you to do is that's going to give you a lot more control over the way this texture is placed on this surface. And so what this does is it gives you these little push pins in here. And what these do is these allow you to adjust the way objects are placed in SketchUp. So let's say, for example, that I wanted to place this corner on this corner right here. Well, what I can do is I can single click on this pin and I can move my mouse and I can place that pin right here, right? Now I have the ability to click and drag my texture. And what I want to do is I want to click and drag on this pin right here. Well, notice how I can use that to inference my texture to this corner right here. Well, then you've got these other options in here for things like distorting your texture. So if I click and drag this, it's going to allow me to distort and skew my texture like this. The one you're usually going to use is this scale and rotate. And so in this case, what we want to do is we want to single click, we want to move our mouse, and we want to place this on this point right here. Well, notice how when I place it on this point, I can click and drag, and that's going to take this whole image and it's going to stretch it between those 2 points. So notice how this corner is staying fixed in place and this one is moving. Well, what that's going to allow me to do is move that outward. Well, notice how now this texture is aligned to this face and I'm not getting these panels cut in half anymore along this side. So you can use that in order to quickly make your textures bigger and smaller and adjust the way they sit on faces. Now, sometimes that doesn't do what we want, right? Because what we really need is we need a little bit of upward distortion as well in order to make this panel match. So the way that we can do that is when you go into position texture, so right click position, what we want to do instead of using these pins is we want to right click and we want to uncheck the box for fixed pins. Notice how when we uncheck the box for fixed pins, what that's going to do is that's going to change your pins in here to these kind of like black and white pins instead of the colored ones. Well, what that means is that means that now we have the ability to select 4 points on our texture. So notice how I'm single clicking and moving this, and you can use all of them to distort your texture. So notice how I can use that in order to kind of distort my texture like this. Well, in this situation, I want to find these corners and I want to click and drag this one up and I want to click and drag this one up. And notice how these other pins stayed fixed. So this gives me the ability to really quickly take a texture like this one and make it match a face. And in this case, let's say we wanted this to be way bigger, right? What I could do is I could take these 4 points, click and drag them like this, and make that fit on my surface. And now you do need to be a little bit careful with your texture placement or your pen placement when you do that in order to make everything fit the way that you want it to. But now if I hit the enter key, notice how I was able to make this way bigger and make it fit on this surface. And if you ever decide that you don't like what you did with position texture, you can right click, go into texture, and click on reset position, just like this. So now let's talk a little bit about importing your own custom textures. Because one thing you're going to know, especially if you do any rendering, is let's say I was to add a new material in here. We'll pick another one of the bricks like this. So I'm going to place my brick on here. Notice how this brick works fine if you're way away from it, but if you're trying to show something that's higher resolution, notice how these built-in textures just aren't necessarily very, they're not very detailed. So a lot of the time what you need to do is you need to bring in your own custom textures. And so there's a ton of websites out there where you can get those. I'll link to a video that I did about some of the best videos for that. But what I want to do is I want to go find a texture image. And so in this case, I'm going to a website called Polyhaven, which has a number of different free textures. And I'm just going to select some texture. So let's say we wanted this dark brick wall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this and I want to bring in the texture material. Now note that when you're using a rendering software, there's other maps as well. So things that make things look a little bit rougher. You don't need any of those for what we're doing right here. In this case, we're just going to bring down maybe a 2K image, and I'm just going to download a zip file with only what's known as the diffuse map. So the diffuse map, and sometimes it's called a color map, is basically the image file that you're going to use in order to apply this. And again, it's going to be called different things on different websites, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to bring that diffuse map in. So I'm going to download this, I'm going to extract it, and then if I look in here, notice how I have this image that I can import into SketchUp. So let's go ahead and let's apply this or create this as a new texture in SketchUp. So the way that we want to do that is we want to start with this button right here for create material. And we're going to call this dark brick. Well, notice how down below there's options in here for using a texture image. And so we want to replace this brick antique with that image that we just downloaded. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to go find that file, and we can just double click on it. And notice how this is automatically going to set this up as a material. So I'm going to click on OK. Once I've done that, I can apply that dark brick material to this surface. And notice how this material is much higher resolution than the material we had in here previously. So it looks a lot better. So a lot of the time, if you're creating more custom things, you're probably going to want to bring in your own custom materials. One thing to be aware of, and this is actually a good website to show you this, is the higher the resolution, the larger the file size. SketchUp doesn't do really well with super high resolution images. So for example, notice how I have the 2K selected right here. Well, if I click on the 8K, this one image is going to be almost 50 megabytes. And so if I was to bring that in and apply that to a surface in SketchUp, this would definitely be higher resolution. But what happens is you start having performance issues a lot of the time because SketchUp really struggles to display those. Now, one thing to note about this is if you do have a file that has some larger textures in here, there is an extension from SketchUp that can allow you to reduce the resolution of those images. So if you go into the SketchUp extension warehouse, we want to look for Material Resizer. So if we click on Material Resizer, there's an extension in here from SketchUp that allows you to resize images in your model. So if I install this, okay, and so if you go to Extensions, Material Resizer, what that's going to do is that's going to show you all of the materials that are in here that you're currently using in SketchUp and their size. And so notice how this dark brick material is a 2048 by 2048 material. Well, if you want to reduce that in place, and note that you can't undo this, by the way, but let's say I wanted this to be smaller, what you can do is you can set how much you want to reduce the material that's over here by checking this box. So in this case, we want to reduce that material to 512. So if I click on Go, what that's going to do is that's going to work in the background, and that's going to reduce the size of that material right here. Notice how that's now 512 by 512. And if you zoom in, notice how it's now lower resolution because it reduced the quality. But if you zoom out, it doesn't really matter. So another thing to be aware of is you do need to make sure that the materials that you're bringing into your model are seamless. What that means is that means you can't just take any image and bring it in as a material. I mean, you can, but I'll show you why it's an issue. So let's say we wanted to use this wood material that I found on Pexels. Well, I can't just come in here and take a snip of it, right? So if I use my snipping tool, and I just take like a partial image of this, right? And I try to bring it into SketchUp, it's going to cause some problems. So I'm going to import this image real quick. So if I was to import that material like this, and then click on OK and apply it, notice what we're getting right here is we're getting this, this repetition of this material, right? And it's really clunky because really what a material is doing is it's basically taking an image and it's repeating it over and over and over again so that it sits flat on a surface. However, this is a problem if you just take a snip like this one because you're going to get these really pronounced borders that are in here. So what you want to do, you want to make sure that when you bring in textures that they're seamless. So a seamless texture, and you can search for seamless textures. Most texture websites are seamless now, but a seamless texture is going to be something that repeats smoothly on an object. So let's say we were to just replace this with a SketchUp material real quick. So if we were to go to maybe the wood right here, and we'll go with this wood floor dark. Notice how this one, even though it's tiling the image, like you can see that you've got like the same wood object over and over again in here, the seams are smooth so that this repeats smoothly. So if I was to make this way smaller, like this, you can still kind of see that it's repeating, but it doesn't have those nasty seams that we had in there before, right? So if I was to jump back to this other material really quick, notice how it just looks like a block of textures that are in here, where this is a lot smoother. So you want to make sure that you're importing seamless textures into SketchUp. Okay, so the last thing is SketchUp textures are a certain file type. So let's say that I wanted to save this dark brick for use later outside of this model, right? So if I wanted to add it to my library, well, what you could do is you can take this and you can right click on it and you can save that as a file type. And so notice how if I do a save as, it wants to save this as an SKM file, which is a SketchUp material file. And what I've done is I've created some folders on my computer for some custom materials. Well, what I can do is I can double click in there and notice how I have different bricks in here. I want to save that dark brick into that folder. So you'll probably want to keep your own custom materials folders somewhere, but I'm just going to save this in here. I'm going to do a save. And so then what you can do is you can open that folder so that you can view it in SketchUp. So the way that works is you can click on the little right arrow right here. We want to click on the option for open or create a collection. And I'm going to go find that folder. So this is my custom materials folder. I'm going to find the brick folder. I'm going to click on select. Well, when I do that, notice how down below that brick folder is going to show up below the line, and I can find any of those SKM files that were in there and use them as materials. So I have a number of different materials that I've already created and saved in here that I can access later. And you can open up multiple different folders if you want to. So for example, I've got a wood folder as well, and it's only got one material in it, but you can see how this works. But then these are just going to act like folders inside of SketchUp. So honestly, I'm not 100% sure if there's a way to make that show up every time. I do know that you can just go in and open or create that collection and access anything in the folder really quickly. All right, so I'll link to that video about the best places to find textures for SketchUp in the notes below this video. Leave a comment below. Let me know if you have any questions about anything we talked about. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.